Imagine the medieval countryside, where rolling fields stretched into the horizon, and life itself depended on the rhythm of the land. The seasons dictated survival. Planting, growing, and harvesting were not just tasks, they were the very heartbeat of medieval society. And at the center of all this activity stood something deceptively simple: the farming tool. Before food reached the table of a king, a merchant, or a peasant family, someone had bent their back in the field, pushing, pulling, or swinging a tool designed to coax life from the soil. These tools were the silent partners of farmers, and though they appear humble, their history is long, intricate, and essential to understanding medieval life. Let us begin with the plow, perhaps the most important of them all. The plow was the foundation of medieval farming. In its simplest form, it was little more than a wooden frame with a blade to cut into the soil. But in the Middle Ages, the plow began to transform. In regions with lighter, sandy soil, the scratch plow, sometimes called the ard, was still used. It carved shallow furrows into the earth, enough to prepare for seed. But in the heavier soils of northern Europe, farmers needed something stronger. Here, the heavy plow emerged, built with an iron blade, a coulter to cut vertically, and a moldboard to turn the soil. This innovation changed farming forever. With it, farmers could till deeper, richer soils and produce larger harvests. But the heavy plow was no small tool. It was massive, requiring multiple oxen or even horses to pull it. Entire communities often worked together just to operate it. The plow became more than just a tool. It was a symbol of productivity, of land brought under control. Villages revolved around its use, with strip fields carved into the earth in long, narrow rows. The straight lines of furrows marked the careful balance between human effort and natural force. Yet the plow was only the beginning. Once soil was broken, the next step was sowing seeds. Medieval farmers used broadcasting, scattering seeds by hand. But to ensure those seeds had a better chance of sprouting, they needed tools to cover them lightly with soil. Simple wooden rakes were used for this purpose, dragging soil gently across the ground. Another indispensable tool was the hoe. At first glance, the hoe seems simple: a wooden shaft with a flat blade attached at the end. Yet it was used in countless ways: breaking up clumps of earth, clearing weeds, shaping rows for planting, or loosening soil around young plants. Hoes were light enough to be wielded by anyone: men, women, and even children. But they required endurance and strength. Hours upon hours of bending, hacking, and scraping marked the slow, steady rhythm of medieval agriculture. And then there was the scythe. Long, curved, and sharp, it was the tool of harvest. With a practiced swing, a farmer could cut swathes of grain or tall grass. But before the scythe became common, peasants relied heavily on the sickle, a smaller, crescent-shaped blade that fit into the hand. Sickles were more precise, but far slower, demanding patience as each handful of stalks was cut. Over time, as harvests grew larger, scythes became the favored tool for efficiency. The scythe was not only practical, but poetic. Writers and artists often depicted it, sometimes in the hands of farmers, and sometimes as a symbol of time itself, cutting down life as it cut down the harvest. In this way, farming tools crossed from the physical into the symbolic, shaping the imagination of medieval culture. But tools were not just made, they had to be maintained. Blacksmiths in every village played a crucial role, forging iron blades, sharpening edges, and repairing broken parts. Without the smith's steady hand at the forge, the plow would be useless, the scythe would dull, and the hoe would break. Farming tools were not disposable. They were treasured possessions, passed down through generations, often repaired dozens of times before finally being replaced. Think of the farmer sharpening a scythe at dawn, the rhythmic scrape of stone against metal mixing with the morning bird song. Think of the oxen harnessed to the heavy plow, straining their muscles as the soil curled away in neat, dark ridges. Imagine the woman stooping in the field with a hoe, patient, steady, carving space for seeds. These were the moments that defined medieval farming life, slow and repetitive, yet absolutely vital. And beyond the individual, these tools shaped society itself. The heavy plow, for example, allowed larger areas of land to be cultivated, which led to population growth in northern Europe. With more food came more trade, and with more trade came the rise of towns. In this way, a simple tool of wood and iron changed the entire map of medieval civilization. The story of medieval farming tools is not flashy. It does not dazzle with golden crowns or tales of conquest. Instead, it is a story of patience, of repetition, of hands blistered and muscles sore. But it is also the story of survival, of communities bound together by the shared work of the fields, of tools that made life possible in an uncertain world. And so, as we begin our long journey into the history of medieval farming tools, let us walk slowly, tool by tool, imagining not only how they were built, but how they were used, and how they shaped the very rhythm of life in the Middle Ages. As we continue our journey into the quiet world of medieval farming tools, let us slow down and focus on the details. The Middle Ages were not rushed. Life in the fields followed the seasons, and tools were used in rhythm with nature's clock. Spring called for plowing and sowing, summer for tending and watching, autumn for harvesting, and winter for repairing tools by the fire. One of the earliest companions of the medieval farmer was the spade, a simple implement often overlooked but deeply important. Spades were made with wooden shafts and, in wealthier areas, fitted with iron tips or full iron blades. With it, soil could be dug for gardens, drainage ditches, or planting spots too small for the heavy plow. In fact, before the rise of larger communal plows, many peasants worked their strips of land with nothing more than spades and hoes. The work was exhausting, digging row by row, turning over heavy clods of soil by hand, but it was steady, reliable, and required no oxen to pull. Spades, like most tools, came in different shapes depending on their use. Narrower blades were used for cutting deep into the earth, while wider ones lifted and turned soil more efficiently. Over time, these designs evolved, passed down not through books or instructions, but by simple observation. A father showing a son how to hold the shaft, a mother showing a daughter how to press her foot against the iron edge, to sink it deeper into the soil. Generations repeated these motions until they became second nature. Next came the harrow. Once the plow had opened, the earth and seeds were scattered. The harrow was dragged across the field to break up soil clumps and cover the seeds. Early harrows were wooden frames, studded with pegs, or sometimes iron teeth, designed to crumble soil and create an even surface. They looked humble, but their effect was significant. Without them, seeds would be left exposed to birds, rain, or wind. With them, the the chances of germination greatly improved. The harrow, unlike the plow, was lighter. It could be pulled by a single horse or ox, or in smaller fields, even by hand. In many illustrations from medieval manuscripts, one can see farmers guiding harrows across freshly plowed strips, their animals straining slowly while dust rises in small clouds behind them. It was not dramatic, but it was essential. We should also pause to think about the rake, which was both a tool of the field and of the household. Larger rakes were used for dragging soil or spreading hay, while smaller hand rakes tended gardens or gathered straw. Their long wooden teeth scratched at the earth, leveling or smoothing as needed. The sound of a rake across dry soil, slow, rasping, rhythmic, would have been a familiar background in any medieval village. As we walk deeper into the fields, we find another companion, the flail. This tool was used not for planting or tending, but for threshing, the process of separating grain from stalk after harvest. A flail consisted of two wooden sticks connected by a short chain or leather thong. The longer stick was the handle, and the shorter one struck the harvested grain, knocking kernels free from the husk. Imagine the scene. After harvest, bundles of wheat or rye laid out on a barn floor. Farmers, men and women alike, swinging flails in a slow, steady rhythm. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of wood striking stalk over and over until the grain loosened. Dust rising, sweat dripping, arms aching. Yet the work continued. Flails were deceptively simple, yet they transformed stalks of wheat into usable food. Without them, bread, the staple of medieval diets, would never reach the oven. The flail also carried symbolic weight. Some medieval chroniclers described peasants as flail bearers, men of the soil, hard-working but bound to routine. In later centuries, even rebel armies of peasants armed themselves with flails, turning the tool of harvest into a weapon of defiance. But in its ordinary place, the flail was steady, humble, and dependable. Of course, farming was not only about grain. Vegetables, too, required their own set of tools. Hand trowels, small spades, and knives were used in gardens to tend onions, leeks, beans, and herbs. Women often worked in these smaller plots, carefully weeding, pruning, and harvesting. Though such tasks rarely made it into official chronicles, they were vital to survival, for vegetables added flavor and nutrition to an otherwise bread-heavy diet. And when we think of these tools, we must also think of the material from which they were made. In the early medieval period, many tools were primarily wooden, but as blacksmithing advanced, iron became increasingly common. Iron edges made plows cut deeper, hoes last longer, and sickles stay sharper. The cost was higher, but the durability was worth it. A peasant family might save for years to afford a sturdy, iron-tipped plow or scythe, knowing it could serve them faithfully for decades. Maintenance was constant. Farmers sharpened blades on whetstones, oiled wooden shafts to prevent splitting, and repaired broken handles with whatever materials were available. In the long winter months, when fields lay quiet, tools were inspected, mended, and prepared for spring. This cycle of care and use meant that tools were not disposable objects. They were companions, respected for the work they enabled. In this way, the medieval farmer's relationship with tools was almost intimate. A plow was not just wood and iron, it was hope for a successful harvest. A scythe was not just a blade, it was the difference between plenty and hunger. The simple rake, hoe, or flail each carried the weight of survival, their steady use binding families and villages together. And so, when we look at these tools today, in museums or illustrations, they may appear plain, even dull, but for those who lived and worked with them, they were lifelines, humble pieces of technology that shaped not only the land, but also the destiny of medieval Europe. The medieval landscape was not only defined by the grand castles or towering cathedrals that dominate our imagination today. Far more common and far more essential were the simple fields dotted with men and women at work, their tools in hand. To walk through such a village was to hear the steady rhythm of wooden handles striking soil, iron blades cutting stalks, and the low murmur of labor that never truly ended. Among the most iconic tools of medieval farming was the sickle. Its crescent-shaped blade was designed for precision, allowing farmers to harvest cereal crops by gripping a handful of stalks with one hand and slicing through them with the other. This was slow, patient work. Entire fields of wheat or rye could take days, even weeks, to cut by hand. Each swing of the sickle was deliberate, and though it lacked the speed of the scythe, it offered control, especially in smaller plots where careful cutting mattered more than efficiency. The sickle was also one of the oldest tools, reaching back into ancient times, but it remained a staple in the Middle Ages because of its simplicity and effectiveness. Wooden handles, sometimes wrapped with leather for grip, made the tool easier to hold, while iron blades gave it durability. For peasants, the sickle was almost an extension of their hand, always nearby, always useful. But as fields grew larger and demands for food increased, the scythe became more prominent. Unlike the sickle, the scythe required a different motion, a broad, sweeping swing across the body, cutting wide swathes of grass or grain in a single movement. It required practice and skill, for the angle of the blade, the sharpness of its edge, and the rhythm of the swing all determined how much could be harvested in a day. A skilled scytheman could mow far more than a sickle user, making it an indispensable tool for large-scale agriculture. The sound of scythes sweeping across the fields in unison became a seasonal music of its own. At harvest time, entire groups of men would line up, their blades shining in the sun, moving together in steady arcs. Behind them, women and children gathered the cut stalks into bundles, tying them with straw ropes. The work was communal, exhausting, and yet deeply rewarding, for in those bundles lay the bread that would sustain families through the long winter ahead. Once harvested, grain still needed to be separated from its stalks, and so the flail returned to the scene, its rhythmic thudding filling barns and courtyards during the autumn months. We should imagine the contrast here, the open fields, alive with the swish of scythes, followed by the enclosed spaces echoing with the beat of flails. Farming was a symphony of sounds, each tool adding its own note to the yearly cycle. But farming was not only about crops, it was also about hay. Livestock, especially oxen and horses, needed fodder for winter, and so haymaking became an equally vital task. For this, scythes were used again, this time to mow meadows filled with long grasses. After cutting, hay was turned and dried with forks and rakes. Wooden forks, shaped with long tines, tossed the hay into the air so the sun could dry it evenly. Large rakes gathered it into piles, later stacked into tall, conical haystacks that dotted the countryside. These haystacks were more than just storage. They were life insurance. A poorly managed hay harvest could mean starving animals, which in turn meant less plowing power for the following year. Once again, the humble tool determined not only the rhythm of daily life, but also the survival of future seasons. It is worth pausing here to reflect on how much depended on these tools. They were not glamorous, nor were they often celebrated. Chronicles of kings and battles rarely mentioned the plow, the hoe, or the rake. Yet without them, no army could march, no town could thrive, no church could stand. Every loaf of bread, every sip of ale, every piece of cheese began with the steady labor of tools in the hands of farmers. The wheelbarrow also deserves a place in this story. Appearing in Europe during the medieval period, it quickly became an essential aid for transporting soil, manure, harvested crops, and even stones for building. A single wheel, balanced carefully, allowed one person to move heavy loads that would otherwise require two or three. Though simple in design, the wheelbarrow was a quiet revolution, easing the burden of endless labor. Think of a farmer pushing a wheelbarrow along a muddy track, its wooden wheel squeaking as it carried turnips, cabbages, or bundles of straw. This was not a dramatic scene, but it was real, ordinary, and constant. Every day, these small tools stitched the fabric of medieval life together. As tools spread and improved, so too did farming communities. Shared plows, communal oxen, and collective hay harvests brought neighbors together. Tools were not always personal possessions. Often, they were shared, borrowed, or managed by the village as a whole. In this way, tools were not only practical, but also social, binding people through cooperation and necessity. And so, when we think of the medieval countryside, we must look past the stereotypes of knights and battles, and instead picture the hoe scraping soil, the sickle slicing stalks, the rake dragging hay, and the wheelbarrow creaking along a dirt road. These were the real sounds of the Middle Ages, the slow, steady rhythm of farming tools, shaping the destiny of an entire world. By now, we can see that medieval farming tools were not just objects of labor. They were companions in the rhythm of life. Every season had its instruments, and each tool carried its own role in the endless cycle of survival. Another tool that shaped this world was the pitchfork. With its long wooden handle and several sturdy tines, the pitchfork became indispensable for moving hay, straw, and manure. Its purpose was simple: to lift, toss, or spread. In summer, it was used to turn drying hay under the sun. In winter, it helped move bedding for livestock or manure to fertilize the fields. The pitchfork may not seem grand, but it lightened the heavy labor of moving bulk materials, making life a little easier for medieval farmers. Its design was straightforward, but every tine had to be carefully carved and shaped, often from a single piece of wood, to ensure it would not snap under strain. Later versions, reinforced with iron, gave even more strength. The hoe, too, deserves a second look. It was used not only for preparing seed beds, but also for weeding, which was one of the most relentless tasks of medieval farming. Weeds threatened crops constantly, and without herbicides or machinery, they had to be pulled or hacked out by hand. A farmer or peasant child with a hoe could spend long days moving slowly down rows of plants, cutting and pulling weeds to give crops a better chance. It was repetitive, monotonous, and yet necessary. We must also speak of the cart, Simple two-wheeled or four-wheeled carts, pulled by oxen or horses, carried not only tools, but also the very fruits of labor. After harvest, sheaves of wheat were loaded onto carts and trundled back to barns. Manure was hauled out to fertilize the fields. Firewood, stones, or even water barrels moved from place to place. The creak of cart wheels over dirt tracks was as familiar a sound as birdsong, echoing in every village. The cart may seem like a vehicle rather than a tool, but in truth, it was part of the farmer's toolkit, a necessity for transporting the results of all other tools. Labor. Without it, the work of plows, scythes, and flails would remain scattered and unfinished. We should pause for a moment here. Imagine the scene: the medieval village in late summer, men with scythes sweeping through golden fields, women with rakes gathering hay, children carrying small bundles of grain to carts, the smith in his workshop, sharpening blades on the anvil, dogs barking, oxen lowing, birds circling above the fields. All of it slow, all of it steady, all of it ordinary. This was the true Middle Ages, not knights in shining armor, but peasants with tools in their hands, working patiently, day after day. And if you've been enjoying this quiet journey into the forgotten tools of medieval farming, then perhaps take a moment, like the steady pause of a farmer sharpening his scythe, to like this story and subscribe for more. Just as tools passed knowledge from one generation to another, your support helps pass these forgotten histories forward. Now, let us return to the fields. Another unsung companion was the mattock. This tool combined features of an axe and a pick, with a heavy iron head fitted sideways onto a wooden shaft. Farmers used it to break up especially hard or rocky soil, to dig ditches, or even to uproot stubborn tree roots. The mattock demanded strength to wield, but it saved countless hours of labor when preparing new ground for farming. In regions where forests were cleared for agriculture, mattocks were invaluable. The forked stick, a simple, often homemade tool, was used to spread straw in animal stalls or to lift small bundles of hay. While it lacked the refinement of crafted tools, it was cheap and effective, made by peasants themselves from branches shaped by nature. This shows us another side of medieval farming. Not every tool was bought from a smith. Many were crafted at home, from wood, stone, or bone, tailored to the immediate needs of a family. It is important to remember that tools were not standardized. Each region, each village, sometimes even each household, had slightly different versions. A plow in France might look different from one in England. A hoe in Germany might be heavier than one in Italy. These differences came from local resources, local soil conditions, and local traditions. Farming tools were practical, but they also carried a kind of cultural fingerprint, showing us how people adapted to their land. One cannot speak of medieval farming tools without mentioning manure forks and dung carts. Though unglamorous, these tools were critical. Fertilizing fields was essential for maintaining soil fertility, and manure from cattle, horses, and pigs had to be moved in vast quantities. Pitchforks lifted it, carts carried it, and spades spread it. The smell may not have been pleasant, but for medieval farmers, it was the smell of future harvests. And beyond crops, there were tools for tending animals themselves, simple knives for cutting fodder, wooden yokes for oxen, and buckets for water. All these were part of the larger toolkit of rural life. While not all of these were directly farming implements, they supported the endless cycle of work that made food possible. When we look closely, we begin to see the medieval farm not as a place of occasional labor, but as a constant workshop alive with motion. Tools hung from walls, leaned against fences, lay in the fields, or sat by the forge. Children grew up learning their shapes, their weight, their sound. Each had its season, its task, its rhythm. So, while the chronicles tell us of kings and battles, the real story of the Middle Ages is written in the worn handles of hoes, the polished shine of scythe blades, and the creak of carts on dirt roads. These were the everyday companions of countless men and women who never made it into the history books, yet without whom history itself could not have unfolded. The world of medieval farming tools stretches wider the more we look. Each implement, no matter how small, played its part in shaping the daily survival of people whose lives depended entirely on the soil. And yet, these tools were not isolated. They often worked together, forming a sequence of tasks that mirrored the cycle of the seasons. Let us imagine the agricultural year, moving tool by tool, step by step. In early spring, before any planting could begin, the land had to be prepared. Heavy plows were drawn out of barns and fitted with sharpened iron blades. Teams of oxen were yoked and urged into motion. As the plows carved long furrows, the soil opened in dark ridges. Behind them, the harrow followed, its wooden frame dragging over the loosened ground, breaking clumps and covering furrows evenly. Without this preparation, no seed could grow well. Once the soil was ready, the sower stepped forward. He carried a sack of seed slung over his shoulder, and with a wide sweep of his arm, scattered grain across the ground. To aid him, simple tools like wooden rakes or lighter harrows helped cover the seeds with soil. Children sometimes followed with sticks, gently patting the ground. It was a family labor, each member playing a role. As the year warmed, weeds appeared, and so the hoe, the spade, and the mattock came into use. Farmers bent over row after row, hacking at weeds that threatened to choke young plants. It was monotonous, but it was also meditative. The steady scrape of a hoe on dry soil, repeated for hours, was as much a sound of summer as birdsong or buzzing bees. Meanwhile, tools for tending livestock never left the farmer's side. Pitchforks spread fresh straw in stalls. Buckets carried water from wells, and knives cut bundles of hay. Farming was never only about crops, it was about keeping the animals alive and strong. For without oxen or horses, the plows could not move, the carts could not roll, and the fields would remain unworked. By summer's height, meadows were cut for hay. Here the scythe was king. With long sweeps, men cut down grasses, leaving them in neat rows to dry. Wooden forks tossed the hay into the air, ensuring the sun dried it evenly, while rakes gathered it into piles. Families worked together in the meadows, laughing, sweating, and pausing often to wipe brows. It was hard labor, but haymaking was also a social occasion, binding neighbors as surely as the harvest itself. Then came autumn, the great harvest. Sickles and scythes moved through golden fields. Each swing cut the stalks that would soon be bread, beer, and fodder. Behind the cutters, women and children bundled stalks into sheaves, tying them with straw bands. Carts carried them back to barns, where flails would later do their work. The sound of the flail, the steady thud of wood against stalk, echoed in the cooler air of autumn evenings. After threshing came winnowing, often done with simple baskets or woven sieves. Grain was tossed into the air, and the wind carried away the lighter chaff, while the heavier kernels fell back down. Even here, small tools, woven baskets, wooden shovels, or sieves, played essential roles. Finally, in winter, the fields lay quiet, but the tools did not. Farmers repaired plows, replaced worn handles on hoes, and sharpened blades. Children watched fathers and mothers work by firelight, learning the care of tools as much as their use. Blacksmiths grew busy in winter, for this was when iron edges were reforged, nails hammered, and broken parts mended. The cycle was endless, and tools were always at the center. We can see now that tools were not just objects, they were a rhythm, a language, a cycle of movement that defined medieval time. The year itself could be told in terms of tools: plows in spring, hoes in summer, scythes in autumn, flails in winter. It is striking, too, how much these tools shaped community. Many of them were too expensive for one family alone. Heavy plows, in particular, required cooperation. Several families would share oxen, share the plow, and share the labor. Harvests were communal. Haymaking was communal, and even threshing often brought neighbors together in barns. Tools, therefore, were not only practical, but social. They tied people to one another as much as to the land. We might imagine medieval tools as crude or primitive compared to modern machines, but they were not. They were finely tuned to the needs of their users, adapted to soil types, crops, and traditions. A plow that worked well in sandy soil would fail in clay. A scythe shaped for wheat would be different from one shaped for grass. These differences tell us of a world where farming knowledge was deep, careful, and passed down through experience rather than books. And yet, for all their importance, these tools were humble. They rarely appeared in official records or grand stories, but they left their mark in the quietest ways: in the furrows across fields, in the haystacks standing tall through winter, in the bread on every table. So, as we walk slowly through this medieval year, step by step, tool by tool, we begin to feel the patience of the people who lived it. Their lives were long seasons of labor, their companions not knights or saints, but hoes, scythes, and plows. When we think of medieval farming tools, we often picture them as static objects, but in truth, they were always in motion. They were passed from hand to hand, from generation to generation, and even from village to village. Each tool carried with it the memory of countless harvests, countless struggles, and countless meals. Consider, for instance, the wooden plow handle, worn smooth by years of gripping. The wood would grow dark from sweat and soil, and the handle itself might bend slightly, molded by the strength of the farmer's arm. No one thought of these details as special at the time, yet they reveal how human and tool became almost one. The hoe, too, told its own story. A blade hammered from iron, fixed into a wooden shaft, used daily in long, slow movements. The hoe dug weeds, loosened soil, and sometimes turned over earth in small gardens. Unlike the heavy plow, the hoe worked quietly, patiently, and often alone. In many ways, it was the tool most closely tied to survival, for gardens fed families directly, providing vegetables, herbs, and small grains when fields could not. Now let us pause and imagine a medieval farmyard. Tools hang on wooden racks in a barn, scythes leaned against a wall, hoes stacked in a corner, flails resting on pegs. A cart stands outside, wheels worn but sturdy. The smell of hay lingers in the air, mixed with smoke from the farmhouse hearth. The farmer walks in, runs a hand across the blade of a sickle, checking for sharpness. These tools were not simply possessions, they were part of the household, as important as bread or fire. Another important tool was the fork, simple but indispensable. Before metal was common, forks were carved from wood. They lifted hay, turned compost, and spread straw for animals. They may seem unimpressive compared to the plow or scythe, but without forks, managing livestock would have been far harder. Buckets, too, deserve mention. Often made of wood, bound with iron bands. They carried water from wells, milk from cows, or grain to feed animals. Even a bucket was a kind of tool, and like the others, it wore out, leaked, and had to be repaired. Every household, no matter how poor, needed at least one. It is worth noting how these tools were maintained. Iron parts were sharpened on whetstones, handles were replaced with fresh wood, and broken parts were mended in winter. A tool that was cared for could last years, even decades. Neglected, it could fail in a single season. Thus, the care of tools was itself a kind of ritual, a reminder that survival depended not just on land or weather, but also on diligence. Now let us move to the larger picture. Farming tools did not exist in isolation from society. They influenced laws, taxes, and even religion. Many medieval documents mention tools indirectly through fines, rents, or obligations. A tenant might be required to plow a lord's land with his own oxen and tools as part of his rent. Tools, therefore, were not merely private possessions. They were bound up in systems of power. In churches, tools sometimes appeared in art. Carvings of scythes or plows symbolized labor and humility. Saints associated with farming, such as Saint Isidore the farmer, were often depicted with tools in hand. These images reminded worshippers that labor in the field was not only necessary, but honorable in the eyes of God. And yet, for all this weight, there was also a gentleness to tools. They were familiar, daily companions. The plow creaked as it moved. The hoe tapped softly in soil. The flail thudded with rhythm in barns. These sounds were part of life, as constant as birdsong or church bells. To live in the medieval countryside was to live surrounded by the voices of tools. It is also fascinating to consider how tools varied across regions. In wetter lands, plows were heavier to cut through damp soil. In drier lands, lighter plows sufficed. In mountainous regions, tools were smaller, easier to carry up slopes. Even the shape of a scythe blade could differ depending on the kind of grass or grain being cut. This adaptability shows the deep intelligence of medieval farmers, who shaped their tools as carefully as they shaped their fields. We should not imagine, however, that life with these tools was easy. Farming was back-breaking work, and tools only eased the burden slightly. Plowing a field took days of effort, and harvesting demanded entire communities to labor from sunrise to sunset. The tools helped, but they also demanded strength, patience, and skill. Without those human qualities, even the sharpest scythe or strongest plow was useless. Still, there is beauty in this struggle. For every furrow cut, every sheaf tied, every pile of hay forked, there was a reward: food on the table, warmth in winter, life continuing for another year. In this sense, medieval tools were not only instruments of labor, they were instruments of hope. As we linger here, Imagining these simple objects, plows, hoes, scythes, forks, buckets, we begin to see the rhythm of medieval life. It was not fast or loud, but steady, deliberate, and deeply tied to the land. These tools were the heartbeat of that world, and without them, there would have been no bread, no survival, no history. As we continue through the quiet fields of the medieval world, it becomes clear that farming tools were more than just implements. They were extensions of the people who used them. Every worn handle, every sharpened blade, every dent in a wooden wheel tells a story of labor, care, and survival. Consider the wooden plow, its iron blade gleaming in the morning sun. It is heavy, demanding not only oxen, but careful guidance by a skilled hand. The farmer walks behind it, gripping the handle, nudging the oxen with soft commands. Each furrow is deliberate, a steady line carved into the earth, promising future growth. It is slow work, methodical, and requires patience, but it also carries satisfaction. For every line cut, for every ridge raised, the soil is made ready for the seeds that will feed a village. Meanwhile, the scythe swings rhythmically across the golden fields. The long blade arcs in a smooth, practiced motion. Behind the cutter, others gather the fallen stalks, tying them into sheaves. This teamwork, slow and steady, binds families and neighbors together. Tools, in this way, were social as well as practical. They shaped relationships, communities, and even the passing of time. And yet, as we observe this slow dance of labor, it is easy to forget just how many tools were involved. The hoe scratches the earth, breaking up clumps of soil, removing weeds. The spade digs deeper furrows or prepares garden beds. The pitchfork lifts hay, straw, or manure with quiet efficiency. The bucket carries water or grain. Even simple wooden rakes or forks play their part, moving soil or harvest into neat rows. Every tool had its season. Spring was for plows and spades. Summer brought hoes and rakes. Autumn was the time for scythes and flails. Winter, though quieter, focused on maintenance, sharpening blades, repairing handles, oiling joints, and preparing for the next year. Tools were never idle. Even in rest, they demanded attention, care, and respect. And if you've been enjoying this calm journey through the rhythms of medieval farming, now is a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe. Just as these tools passed knowledge and labor from generation to generation, your support helps preserve these quiet histories for future viewers. It's a small act, much like caring for a tool, but it ensures that the story continues. Returning to the fields, let us reflect on the flail used for threshing grain. After harvest, bundles of wheat or rye were laid out in barns or yards. The flail's wooden sticks thudded repeatedly against the stalks, separating grain from husk. The sound, steady, repetitive, echoed through villages. It was hard, unglamorous work, but essential. Without threshing, the harvest would be useless. Without flails, the work would take far longer and demand more hands. Another quiet companion of medieval agriculture was the mattock. This versatile tool, combining features of an axe and a pick, broke through hard soil, removed stubborn roots, and helped clear new fields. Its weight required strength, but the results were transformative. Land that had seemed impossible to farm could become productive with careful use of a mattock. Tools also reflected local conditions and resources. In wetter regions, plows were heavier and sturdier to cut through dense soil. In mountainous areas, Tools were lighter and more portable. Iron blades, once rare and expensive, gradually became more common, while wood remained the primary material for shafts, handles, and frames. Each adaptation tells us of medieval ingenuity, of communities learning to shape their tools as carefully as they shaped their fields. And yet, despite all their utility, tools remained humble. They were rarely recorded in chronicles or celebrated in stories of knights and kings, but their impact was profound. Plows determined food production, scythes determined harvest speed, flails determined how quickly grain could be prepared for winter. Every loaf of bread, every pint of ale, every bite of vegetable depended on these unassuming instruments. In barns and workshops, tools were cared for with the same diligence used in the fields. Whetstones sharpened blades, oil kept wooden handles from splitting, and broken iron parts were reforged. In winter, farmers spent hours repairing what had served them through the past year, preparing for the cycle to begin anew. Tools were not disposable. They were long-term companions, reflecting the skill, patience, and endurance of their users. We should also remember that tools shaped social structures. Heavy plows were often shared among families or villages. Oxen and carts were communal resources. Harvests required cooperative labor. Tools created interdependence, ensuring that survival was not a solitary endeavor. In this way, simple implements influenced culture, community, and even the rhythm of life itself. Finally, consider the artistry hidden within these tools. Even simple wooden handles were carefully carved for grip and balance. Iron edges were forged and honed to precise angles. Rakes, forks, and spades were tailored for specific soils, crops, and tasks. In a quiet, functional way, they were small marvels of engineering and design, reflecting an intimate understanding of the land and the labor it demanded. Through this lens, medieval farming tools are not just implements, they are stories. They are histories written in wood, iron, and sweat. They are the unspoken companions of survival, linking generations, shaping communities, and marking the passage of time in rhythm with the seasons. As we step further into the medieval countryside, it becomes clear that tools were not merely instruments, they were partners in the quiet rhythm of daily life. The plow, the hoe, the scythe, and the flail were extensions of the hands and minds of those who wielded them. Through their use, entire communities survived. Seasons passed, and the slow heartbeat of medieval life continued. Among the most enduring images of medieval farming is the plow cutting through the field at dawn. The soil, dark and fertile, curls along the iron blade, forming neat furrows. Teams of oxen strain against the yoke, guided by the firm hand of a farmer who knows every inch of his land. The heavy plow, though cumbersome, allows fields to yield crops that a simpler tool could not manage. Its impact on agricultural productivity cannot be overstated. Without it, large-scale cultivation of northern European soils would have been impossible. Beside the plow, the hoe works tirelessly. Small plots, gardens, or the spaces between rows of grain are carefully tended. Weeds are removed, soil loosened, and paths cleared. The hoe requires skill and patience. One wrong movement can damage young plants, yet the motion becomes meditative, almost rhythmic, with the steady scrape against earth, creating a quiet music unique to the fields. The scythe, with its long, curved blade dominates the summer harvest. Its motion is a dance of precision and strength. Fields of wheat, barley, or rye fall before its swing, while workers behind gather and bundle the stalks. Scythes varied in shape depending on the crop and terrain, reflecting the adaptability of medieval farmers. For those skilled in its use, the scythe could mow wide areas quickly, turning arduous labor into a carefully choreographed rhythm. Once the grain was cut, it awaited the flail. Threshing was essential, separating kernels from the husks. The flail's wooden handles thudded again and again against bundles of stalks, a sound that echoed through barns and courtyards. Though repetitive and tiring, this work ensured that grain could be stored safely and used for bread, ale, and seed for the next planting season. The flail, like other tools, was simple in design, but powerful in function. Meanwhile, tools like the rake and pitchfork worked behind the scenes. Hay was turned, straw gathered, and manure moved, all necessary for feeding animals, fertilizing soil, and maintaining fields. These tools, humble as they seem, ensured that the cycle of planting and harvesting continued smoothly. They demonstrate that every tool, no matter how small, played a role in survival. The spade and mattock served multiple purposes. The spade dug holes for planting or garden beds, turned soil, and moved earth for drainage. The mattock, heavier and sharper, broke up hard ground or roots, preparing new plots for cultivation. Both demanded skill, and both were carefully maintained, sharpened, and repaired during the quiet winter months. Tools, in this way, were both practical and enduring. It is important to consider the social aspects of these tools. Not every family owned a heavy plow, a team of oxen, or a cart. Communities often shared tools and animals, working together to ensure everyone could complete the necessary tasks. Harvesting large fields required cooperation, bringing families and neighbors together. In this way, tools were not only functional, they were social instruments, shaping the rhythm of medieval village life. Even smaller tools, like wooden forks, knives, and buckets, played crucial roles. Forks lifted hay or straw, knives cut fodder or plants, and buckets carried water or milk. Each was simple, but all were indispensable. Without these quiet instruments, daily life would have been far more laborious and inefficient. The medieval farm was a symphony of tools, each contributing its part. Maintenance of tools was another vital task. Iron edges were sharpened with whetstones, wooden handles were replaced or repaired, and simple oils or resins were used to prevent splitting. A farmer's winter months were often spent in the workshop, tending tools with care. Well-maintained implements could last decades, while neglected tools quickly failed, threatening the livelihood of families dependent on them. Tools also carried symbolic and cultural significance. Plows represented productivity and stewardship of the land. Scythes symbolized both harvest and the passage of time, sometimes appearing in art or literature as a metaphor for mortality. Even humble hoes, or rakes, became part of the quiet story of labor and survival, showing that everyday implements can hold deep meaning beyond their practical use. The diversity of tools reflects the adaptability of medieval farmers. Each village, each region, developed its own styles and methods. Soil, terrain, climate, and crops all influenced the design and use of tools. A plow built for clay soil would differ from one used in sandy fields. A scythe for wheat would differ from one used in tall meadow grass. These variations show the ingenuity of a people attuned to their environment, shaping tools as carefully as they shaped their fields. Through all of this, life moved slowly, deliberately, in rhythm with the seasons and the demands of labor. Tools were companions, teachers, and silent witnesses to centuries of toil. Their impact, though quiet, was immense, enabling communities to thrive, shaping economies, and sustaining life itself. And as we pause here, imagine the scene: a medieval farm at sunset, the last rays of light glinting on iron blades, oxen resting after a long day, children carrying buckets, and adults tending tools before nightfall. It is a calm, ordinary, yet extraordinary moment, the heart of medieval life, shaped by tools. The medieval countryside was alive with the quiet presence of tools. Though often overlooked in grand histories of kings and wars, these implements were the true engines of survival. Every furrow, every bundle of hay, every heap of grain reflected their indispensable work. Among the most vital tools was the sickle, a simple curved blade used for harvesting small plots of grain. Its design allowed farmers to grasp a handful of stalks and cut them cleanly with minimal waste. Though slower than the scythe, the sickle offered precision, especially in gardens or fields, too small for larger tools. It was a companion to countless hands over centuries, worn smooth by use, and crucial for the bread that sustained families. In larger fields, the scythe became the primary harvesting tool. Its long, curved blade required skill and strength, yet in the hands of a practiced farmer, it could mow broad swathes of crops efficiently. The scythe's rhythm was steady, almost meditative, shaping the pace of life during harvest season. As stalks fell, women and children gathered them into sheaves, tying them carefully for transport to barns or carts. Once harvested, grain required processing, which brought the flail into focus. This tool separated kernels from husks, a task both laborious and essential. Its simple design, a short striking stick connected by leather or chain to a longer handle, allowed farmers to beat the harvested stalks until the grain fell free. The sound, repetitive and steady, echoed across yards and barns, a reminder that survival depended on constant, patient labor. Haymaking, too, relied on a set of quiet but essential tools. Pitchforks lifted and turned cut grass, ensuring it dried evenly under the sun. Rakes gathered it into neat piles for storage. Carts carried bundles back to barns, while wooden forks and spades spread straw for animal bedding. Each tool, no matter how small, played a role in ensuring that livestock survived winter months and that the fields remained fertile. It is important to understand that these tools were never isolated objects. They functioned in a cycle, in harmony with one another. A plow prepared the soil for sowing. Hoes and rakes tended the crops. Scythes harvested them. Flails and sieves processed them. And carts transported the results. This interconnected system of tools and labor shaped the very rhythm of medieval life, binding communities to the land and to one another. Maintenance was a constant concern. Iron blades were sharpened with whetstones. Wooden handles were inspected for cracks or rot. Farmers often spent the winter months repairing and preparing tools, ensuring they would survive the next cycle of planting and harvest. The care of tools was itself a discipline, a quiet form of devotion to survival. Neglect could mean failed crops, wasted labor, and hunger. Even simple implements like wooden buckets or small spades, were indispensable. Buckets carried water from wells or streams, moved milk from cows, or transported grain and compost. Small spades dug garden beds, removed weeds, or assisted in drainage projects. Each implement, no matter how humble, contributed to the daily work of survival, and none could be truly replaced without affecting the delicate balance of medieval life. Tools were also a reflection of community and social organization. Not every family could afford a heavy plow or a team of oxen. Villages often shared resources, rotating the use of plows, scythes, and carts among households. Harvests and haymaking became communal endeavors, drawing neighbors together in work and conversation. In this way, tools shaped not only labor, but relationships, fostering cooperation and interdependence. Materials mattered greatly. Wood remained the primary medium for handles, shafts, and frames, while iron provided durability for blades and edges. In wealthier areas, iron-tipped plows became common, improving efficiency, while in poorer regions, wooden or stone-tipped versions were more typical. Tools varied by region, soil type, and crop, showing the ingenuity of farmers adapting to their environment. We also see tools in cultural and symbolic contexts. Plows, scythes, and other implements appeared in carvings, manuscripts, and church art, often symbolizing diligence, humility, or the cycles of life and death. Even ordinary tools carried layers of meaning beyond their practical function, connecting people to faith, tradition, and the continuity of life. The pace of life dictated by tools was slow and deliberate. Spring was plowing and sowing, summer was weeding and tending, autumn was harvesting and processing, winter was repairing and preparing. Every movement of a tool shaped the rhythm of the year, teaching patience, endurance, and respect for nature's cycles. It is fascinating to consider the subtle artistry embedded in these implements. Handles were shaped for comfort, edges forged for precision, and each tool adapted to its particular purpose. A plow for clay soil differed from one for sandy fields. A scythe for wheat differed from one for meadow grass. The design of tools reflected an intimate understanding of the land, crops, and the human body. Even in the quietest moments, tools told stories. A worn scythe blade, a polished plowshare, a fork smoothed by generations of hands, all spoke of continuity, diligence, and survival. They were witnesses to centuries of labor, to families feeding themselves, to communities sustaining one another. As we pause here, it is worth reflecting these tools, often overlooked in history, were as crucial to the medieval world as swords or castles. They shaped lives, economies, and societies in ways that are easy to miss, yet impossible to ignore. As we journey deeper into the world of medieval farming, it becomes evident that tools were more than mere instruments. They were companions, teachers, and lifelines. Every plow, hoe, scythe, and flail carried centuries of knowledge, passed quietly from one generation to the next. The plow remained the backbone of agriculture. Its iron blade cut deep furrows, turning over soil to prepare it for seeds. Heavy and demanding, it required strength, coordination, and the guidance of oxen or horses. A well-made plow could work fields efficiently, yet it demanded constant attention. Handles had to be firm and straight, blades sharpened, and joints reinforced. Every detail mattered, for a faulty plow could ruin an entire season's work. Alongside the plow, the hoe labored silently, It tended small plots, gardens, and spaces between crops. Its motion was slow and rhythmic, scraping away weeds, loosening soil, and shaping the earth for planting. Unlike the plow, which demanded teams and oxen, the hoe allowed for precision, control, and personal connection with the soil. In the summer months, the scythe swung in sweeping arcs across the fields. Its curved blade cut grass and grain efficiently, while workers behind gathered and bundled the stalks. This was labor that required skill, balance, and endurance. One wrong angle could leave stalks standing, wasted and untended. For those adept in its use, the scythe became an extension of the body, its motion almost meditative, shaping both the land and the rhythm of life. Harvesting was only the beginning. The flail transformed bundles into usable grain. The repeated thudding of wood on stalks separated kernels from chaff, allowing families to store, bake, and plan for the winter months. Though repetitive and exhausting, this task was critical to survival. The flail, simple as it was, symbolized patience, diligence, and the rhythm of the seasons. Haymaking, too, required an array of tools. Pitchforks lifted and turned drying grass. Rakes gathered it into neat piles. Carts transported bundles to barns, while wooden forks spread straw for livestock bedding. Each tool, no matter how small, contributed to a network of work that sustained people, animals, and fields alike. Even smaller implements were vital. Buckets carried water or milk. Small spades dug garden beds or assisted in drainage. Knives cut fodder and herbs. Each of these quiet tools, often overlooked, formed the foundation of daily survival. The medieval farm was a symphony of implements, each contributing to the harmony of life. Maintenance remained essential. Blades were sharpened, wooden handles replaced or oiled, and broken parts reforged. Winter months were often devoted to repairs, preparing for the next cycle of planting and harvest. Tools, like the people who used them, required care, attention, and respect. Neglect could lead to failed crops, wasted labor, or hunger. The social dimension of tools was equally important. Many were too expensive for a single family, such as heavy plows or carts. Villages often shared these resources, rotating their use among households. Harvests, haymaking, and other tasks became communal efforts, strengthening ties between neighbors and fostering cooperation. In this way, tools shaped not only labor, but relationships, helping to build and maintain medieval communities. Materials varied as well. Wood provided the framework, while iron offered durability. In wealthier regions, iron-tipped plows became common, allowing for more efficient cultivation, while in poorer areas, simpler wooden or stone-tipped versions sufficed. The design of tools reflected local conditions, soil types, and crops, showcasing the ingenuity and adaptability of medieval farmers. Cultural significance also played a role. Tools often appeared in religious art or literature, symbolizing diligence, stewardship, or the cycle of life and death. Plows could signify productivity. Scythes sometimes represented mortality. Even humble hoes, or rakes, while not celebrated, were honored for their essential contribution to survival. And if you've been enjoying this slow journey through the rhythms of medieval life, now is a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe. Just as these tools passed knowledge, labor, and survival from one generation to the next, your support helps keep these forgotten histories alive. It is a small act, but it allows the story to continue, reaching more curious minds who want to understand the quiet power of everyday tools. Finally, consider the artistry embedded in these implements. Handles were carved for comfort and balance, blades forged for precision, rakes and forks shaped for specific soils or crops. Each tool reflected an intimate understanding of the land, the crop, and the human body. Even in its simplicity, each implement embodied careful thought, experience, and innovation. Through all this, life moved slowly, deliberately, in rhythm with the seasons and the demands of labor. Tools were companions, silent teachers, and witnesses to centuries of toil. They shaped the lives of countless families, supported communities, and allowed civilizations to thrive. Though often overlooked in grand histories, they were the foundation of medieval life. And so, as we pause at the close of this chapter, we see that medieval farming tools were more than objects. They were stories, histories, and lifelines connecting people to the land, each other, and the seasons that governed their existence. As we walk further into the medieval countryside, it becomes clear that every tool tells a story. Each plow, scythe, hoe, and flail is a silent witness to centuries of labor, endurance, and survival. These implements were not merely objects, they were extensions of human effort, guiding the rhythm of life from dawn to dusk, season after season. Consider the plow, the backbone of medieval agriculture. Heavy and demanding, it cut deep furrows into the earth, turning over soil to prepare it for sowing. Oxen or horses drew it, while farmers guided the blade with care. A single misstep could break the iron, snap a wooden handle, or ruin the soil preparation. Its weight and precision demanded both skill and strength. Yet in the hands of an experienced farmer, the plow became an instrument of efficiency, shaping fields that would feed entire villages. Alongside the plow, the hoe labored quietly. It worked in gardens, between crop rows, and in smaller plots where precision mattered, scraping the soil, uprooting weeds, and preparing beds for planting. The hoe demanded patience. Its rhythm was almost meditative, a slow dance that connected farmer to land in a tactile, intimate way. The scythe, with its long curved blade, dominated the summer harvest. Experienced hands wielded it with skill, cutting broad swaths of wheat, barley, or rye. Behind the cutters, others gathered the stalks, tying them into sheaves for transport. The motion required balance, endurance, and precision. Each swing shaped the land, each bundle tied contributed to survival. The scythe was not just a tool, it was a companion in the dance of life, marking the passage of the seasons. Once harvested, grain required processing. The flail separated kernels from chaff, turning bundles into usable food. Its repeated thuds echoed through barns and courtyards, a rhythm that mirrored the heartbeat of the village itself. Though physically demanding, the flail was indispensable. Without it, the harvest could not sustain the community, and winter would bring hardship. Haymaking demanded additional tools. Pitchforks turned and lifted grass, ensuring it dried evenly. Rakes gathered it into neat piles, and carts transported bundles to barns for storage. Wooden forks spread straw for livestock bedding. Each implement, no matter how small, played a role in maintaining the delicate balance of agricultural life. Survival depended on these quiet companions as much as on the soil itself. Even the simplest tools were vital. Buckets carried water or milk. Small spades dug garden beds or assisted in drainage, and knives prepared fodder or herbs. Each instrument, humble as it may seem, contributed to the smooth functioning of daily life. The medieval farm was a symphony of tools, each playing a part in a slow, deliberate rhythm of labor. Maintenance was never optional. Blades required sharpening, handles needed replacing or reinforcing, and iron joints demanded oiling to prevent rust. Winter months often became a time for repairs, preparation, and care. A well-maintained tool could last decades. A neglected one could fail, threatening the food supply and well-being of entire families. Tools were also social instruments. Heavy plows, carts, and teams of oxen were often shared among families or communities. Harvests and haymaking became communal labor, bringing neighbors together. In this way, tools shaped social relationships, creating interdependence and cooperation. They were as much about connecting people as they were about working the land. Materials and design reflected adaptation and ingenuity. Wood provided strength and flexibility. Iron provided durability. Tools varied by region, soil type, and crop. A plow designed for clay soil was different from one meant for sandy fields. Scythes differed based on the crop they were intended to cut. These adaptations show the skill and resourcefulness of medieval farmers, who molded tools to fit the land rather than reshaping the land to fit the tools. Cultural significance also emerged from these implements. Plows, scythes, and flails appeared in religious art, symbolizing diligence, stewardship, and the cycles of life. Even humble hoes or forks carried meaning, representing patience, endurance, and human connection to nature. Tools were more than functional. They were woven into the fabric of medieval thought and belief. Life moved in cycles dictated by these tools. Spring brought plowing and sowing. Summer demanded tending and weeding. Autumn was harvesting and processing. Winter focused on repair and preparation. Tools not only shaped labor, but also structured the passage of time, teaching patience, endurance, and respect for the natural rhythms of life. Finally, let us reflect on the artistry embedded in these simple instruments. Handles were carved for grip and balance, blades forged for precision, rakes and forks shaped for specific crops and soil conditions. Even in their simplicity, these tools embodied knowledge, skill, and a profound understanding of the land. Through them, we glimpse the quiet heartbeat of medieval life. These tools were companions, teachers, and witnesses to centuries of labor, shaping not only fields, but also the very people who used them. They enabled survival, bound communities together, and ensured that life, despite hardship, continued year after year. As the seasons cycled through the medieval year, the quiet presence of tools was always evident. Plows, hoes, scythes, flails, and simple implements like buckets and forks formed the backbone of life in villages and farms. They were not only functional, they were companions, shaping daily rhythms, labor, and community bonds. The plow remained central to agriculture. Heavy, iron-tipped, and guided by skilled hands, it turned soil to prepare fields for planting. Teams of oxen strained against the yoke, while the farmer walked steadily behind, controlling the depth and direction of each furrow. The plow demanded strength and skill, yet in the hands of an experienced farmer, it became a natural extension of the body. Its rhythm dictated the pace of spring, marking the beginning of a season that would determine the survival of families and communities alike. Alongside the plow, the hoe worked quietly in gardens and between crop rows. Its purpose was precision, removing weeds, loosening soil, and shaping planting beds. The hoe demanded patience and care. Its motion, slow and deliberate, connected farmers intimately with the earth, reinforcing the bond between human and soil. Summer brought the scythe, swung by skilled hands across golden fields of wheat, rye, and barley. Its long, curved blade required both strength and balance. Workers behind the scythe gathered stalks into bundles, tying them into sheaves for transport to barns or carts. Harvesting with a scythe was a cooperative effort, linking families and neighbors in a shared rhythm of labor and survival. The sound of the scythe cutting through stalks was the music of summer, echoing across fields and meadows. Once harvested, grain needed processing. The flail separated kernels from husks, turning bundles into usable food. Its repeated thuds against the stalks created a steady rhythm, heard throughout barns and courtyards. Though repetitive and physically demanding, this process was essential. Without it, grain could not be stored, milled, or baked, and the survival of families would be threatened. Haymaking and livestock care also relied on an array of tools. Pitchforks lifted and turned drying grass. Rakes gathered it into neat piles, and carts transported the hay to barns. Wooden forks spread straw as bedding for animals. Even small, humble implements like buckets and spades played crucial roles in daily life. Each tool, no matter how modest, contributed to the smooth functioning of a farm and the survival of its inhabitants. Maintenance of tools was constant. Iron blades were sharpened, wooden handles replaced or reinforced, and joints oiled to prevent splitting or rust. Winter months, often quieter in terms of fieldwork, were dedicated to this essential upkeep. A well-maintained tool could last decades. A neglected one could fail at the most critical moment, risking food and livelihood. Tools required care, just as they provided labor. Tools also shaped social dynamics. Heavy plows and carts were often shared among families or villages. Communal labor during harvests, haymaking, or planting strengthened bonds between neighbors. In this way, tools were not only practical, they were instruments of cooperation and community cohesion, binding people together in common purpose. Regional variations in tools reveal both ingenuity and adaptation. Wood, the primary material for handles and frames, provided strength and flexibility. Iron offered durability for blades and edges. Tools were shaped according to soil type, crop, and climate. Plows for clay soil were heavier and sturdier than those for sandy fields. Scythes were shaped differently for wheat versus grass. These variations highlight the skill and knowledge of medieval farmers, who molded their tools to fit the environment rather than forcing the land to conform. Cultural significance also emerged from tools. Plows and scythes appeared in religious art, symbolizing diligence, stewardship, and the cycles of life. Even modest hoes and forks carried meaning, reflecting patience, endurance, and connection to the earth. Tools were practical, symbolic, and deeply intertwined with daily life and belief. And if you've been enjoying this calm journey into medieval farming, now is a perfect moment to like this video and subscribe. Much like the careful maintenance of a plow or the rhythm of the scythe, your support helps keep these stories alive, ensuring that the quiet histories of tools and labor continue to reach curious minds around the world. Finally, consider the artistry hidden in simple implements: handles carved for balance, blades forged for precision, and forks and rakes shaped for specific crops and soils. All demonstrate ingenuity and knowledge. Even the simplest tool reflects skill, experience, and intimate understanding of the land. Through the lens of these implements, we glimpse the heartbeat of medieval life. They were silent companions, teaching patience, endurance, and respect for the cycles of the seasons. Tools enabled survival, shaped communities, and sustained civilizations through centuries of quiet, relentless labor. Though often overlooked in grand narratives, they were the foundation of life itself, connecting people to the land, to each other, and to the rhythms of the natural world. In the quiet rhythm of medieval life, tools were ever present companions. They shaped the land, guided labor, and connected communities. From the earliest plows to the simplest forks, each implement told a story of endurance, skill, and survival. Though often overlooked in history books, these tools were as essential as any castle, knight, or crown. The plow remained the centerpiece of medieval agriculture. Its iron blade cut deep into the soil, turning over earth to prepare it for planting. Oxen or horses provided the necessary strength, while farmers guided each furrow with care. A skilled hand could create straight, even rows, maximizing productivity, but a single misstep could break the iron or warp the wooden frame, showing just how dependent life was on both the tool and the human using it. The hoe worked alongside the plow in quieter, more precise tasks. It tended gardens, removed weeds, and shaped planting beds. Its slow, deliberate motion connected farmers intimately with the earth. There was an art in using the hoe effectively, a balance between pressure and care, rhythm and patience. Unlike the plow, which required power and cooperation with animals, the hoe allowed for careful, detailed work that directly influenced the health of crops. The scythe, used primarily during harvest, required skill and balance. With each long, sweeping motion, the blade cut golden stalks of wheat, rye, or barley. Workers behind the scythe gathered the stalks into sheaves, tying them for transport to barns or carts. Harvesting was a communal task, blending skill, strength, and cooperation. The rhythm of the scythe became the music of summer, echoing across fields and villages alike. After harvest, the flail transformed cut stalks into usable grain. Its repetitive thudding separated kernels from husks, enabling families to store and prepare food for the coming months. Though the work was physically demanding, it was essential for survival. A well-threshed harvest meant bread, ale, and seed for the next planting season. The flail, simple yet indispensable, symbolized patience, diligence, and the quiet pulse of rural life. Haymaking and livestock care relied on a variety of tools. Pitchforks lifted and turned drying hay. Rakes gathered it into neat piles, and carts transported bundles to barns. Wooden forks spread straw as bedding for animals, while buckets carried water, milk, or grain. Each implement, no matter how small, contributed to the delicate balance of farm life, demonstrating that survival depended on the coordinated use of many tools rather than a single hero. Maintenance was constant. Iron blades needed sharpening, wooden handles required replacement or reinforcement, and joints were oiled to prevent splitting or rusting. Winter months often became a time for repair and preparation. A well-maintained tool could last decades. Neglect could result in failure at the worst possible moment. Tools demanded attention as much as they offered labor. Tools shaped not only work, but also social structure. Heavy plows, carts, and teams of oxen were often shared among families. Harvests, haymaking, and other labor-intensive tasks became communal events, fostering cooperation and mutual dependence. Tools, in this way, were social as well as practical, bringing people together in shared purpose and responsibility. Regional differences influenced tool design. Wood provided strength and flexibility, while iron offered durability. Plows differed based on soil types, heavier for clay, lighter for sandy fields. Scythes varied according to the crop being cut. These adaptations reflect the intelligence and ingenuity of medieval farmers, who modified tools to suit their environment rather than forcing the land to conform. Tools also carried cultural significance. Plows, scythes, and flails appeared in art and religious symbolism, representing diligence, stewardship, and the cycles of life. Even modest implements like hoes, forks, and rakes embodied endurance, patience, and human connection to the natural world. Practicality and symbolism existed side by side, each reinforcing the importance of labor and survival. The rhythm of life was dictated by the seasons and the tools used to navigate them. Spring brought plowing and sowing. Summer required tending and weeding. Autumn was harvesting and processing. Winter focused on repair and preparation. Tools structured time, teaching patience, endurance, and an intimate awareness of the land's cycles. Finally, consider the subtle artistry embedded in these tools. Handles were carved for comfort and balance, blades forged for precision, and forks and rakes shaped for specific soils and crops. Even the simplest implement reflected skill, knowledge, and intimate understanding of the natural world. These tools were small marvels of medieval engineering, perfectly suited to the demands of survival. Through them, we glimpse the quiet heartbeat of medieval life. Tools were companions, teachers, and witnesses to centuries of labor. They enabled survival, shaped communities, and ensured continuity across generations. Though often overlooked in grand histories, they formed the foundation of the life itself, connecting people to the land, to one another, and to the rhythms of the seasons. In the slow rhythm of medieval life, tools were more than mere instruments. They were companions, guides, and witnesses to survival. Every plow, hoe, scythe, flail, and humble bucket carried stories of labor, care, and perseverance. They shaped fields, lives, and communities, quietly sustaining generations. The plow was the foundation of medieval farming. Heavy, iron-tipped, and drawn by oxen or horses, it turned soil to prepare fields for sowing. Farmers guided each furrow with care, ensuring straight lines and even soil depth. The plow demanded both skill and strength. A misstep could damage the blade or handle, threatening the season's yield. Yet, in capable hands, it became an extension of the body, a steady companion through spring and early summer, marking the rhythm of life and labor. Alongside the plow, the hoe worked quietly. It tended gardens, removed weeds, and shaped planting beds. Its rhythm was deliberate, almost meditative, connecting farmer to soil in a tactile and intimate way. Unlike the plow, which required power and coordination with animals, the hoe allowed for precision, care, and a personal touch that directly influenced the success of crops. The scythe ruled the summer harvest, With its long, curved blade, skilled hands could cut broad swathes of wheat, barley, or rye. Behind each scythe, others gathered stalks into bundles, tying them into sheaves for transport to barns or carts. Harvesting required coordination, strength, and balance. The rhythm of the scythe shaped life in summer, blending work with the sound and motion of steady, communal labor. Once harvested, grain required processing. The flail separated kernels from husks, turning cut stalks into usable food. Its repetitive thuds echoed through barns and yards, a sound that marked the pulse of survival. Though the work was tiring and repetitive, it was essential. Properly threshed grain ensured bread, ale, and seeds for future planting. The flail symbolized patience, diligence, and the quiet rhythm of medieval life. Haymaking and livestock care relied on various tools. Pitchforks lifted and turned drying grass. Rakes gathered it into piles, and carts transported bundles to barns. Wooden forks spread straw for bedding animals. Simple tools like buckets carried water, milk, or grain. Each implement, no matter how modest, contributed to the complex rhythm of medieval farm life, ensuring both human and animal survival. Maintenance of tools was constant. Iron blades were sharpened, wooden handles replaced or reinforced, and joints oiled to prevent splitting or rust. Winter months, quieter in terms of fieldwork, were devoted to repair and preparation. A well-maintained tool could last decades, while a neglected one might fail at a critical moment, jeopardizing crops and livelihood. Tools required care as much as they provided labor. Tools also influenced social structures. Heavy plows, carts, and teams of oxen were shared among families or communities. Harvests, haymaking, and other labor-intensive tasks became communal events, strengthening bonds and fostering cooperation. In this way, tools shaped relationships as much as fields, weaving social and practical functions together. Regional differences shaped tool design and function. Wood provided strength and flexibility, while iron offered durability. Plows differed according to soil type, scythes according to the crop, and rakes or forks according to specific tasks. These adaptations highlight the ingenuity and skill of medieval farmers, who shaped tools to fit the land rather than forcing the land to conform. Tools also carried symbolic and cultural meaning. Plows, scythes, and flails appeared in religious art, representing diligence, stewardship, and the cycle of life. Even humble hoes and forks reflected endurance, patience, and human connection to the earth. Practicality and symbolism existed side by side, demonstrating the importance of labor in medieval thought and culture. And if you've been enjoying this journey through medieval life, now is a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe. Just as these tools passed knowledge, labor, and survival from one generation to the next, your support helps keep these quiet histories alive, ensuring that the stories of forgotten tools continue to reach curious minds around the world. Finally, consider the artistry within these simple implements. Handles were carved for grip and balance, blades forged for precision, rakes and forks shaped for specific soils and crops. Even the simplest tool reflected skill, experience, and intimate knowledge of the land. They were small marvels of engineering, perfectly adapted to the needs of survival. Through these tools, we glimpse the heartbeat of medieval life. They were companions, teachers, and silent witnesses to centuries of labor. They enabled survival, shaped communities and ensured continuity across generations. Though often overlooked in history, they formed the foundation of life itself, connecting people to the land, to one another, and to the rhythm of the seasons. The medieval countryside was alive with the quiet presence of tools. They shaped the land, guided labor, and connected people to the rhythm of the seasons. Though often overlooked in grand histories, these implements were essential to survival, community, and the continuity of life. At the heart of agriculture was the plow. Its iron blade cut through soil, turning it over to prepare fields for sowing. Drawn by oxen or horses, it required skill and strength to guide each furrow precisely. A damaged plow or a misaligned furrow could jeopardize an entire season's work. Yet in skilled hands, the plow became an extension of the farmer's body, guiding the flow of labor and shaping the land to maximize productivity. The hoe complemented the plow, working in smaller plots, gardens, and between rows of crops. Its slow, deliberate motion removed weeds, loosened soil, and shaped planting beds. The hoe demanded patience and care, connecting the farmer intimately with the soil. Unlike the plow, which required power and animals, the hoe allowed precision and subtlety, directly affecting the success of crops and ensuring the survival of families. During summer, the scythe was indispensable. With its long curved blade, it cut golden stalks of wheat, barley, or rye. Skilled workers wielded it with rhythm and balance, while others gathered the stalks into bundles, tying them into sheaves for storage. Harvesting was a communal effort, blending strength, coordination, and timing. The sound and motion of the scythe shaped the summer, embedding rhythm and music into labor. After harvest, the flail transformed cut stalks into usable grain. Its repeated thuds separated kernels from husks, enabling families to store, bake, and plan for winter. Though repetitive and exhausting, this work was essential. The flail symbolized patience, diligence, and the steady pulse of medieval life, ensuring that families could survive harsh seasons and sustain the community. Haymaking and livestock care relied on a variety of tools. Pitchforks lifted and turned drying grass, rakes gathered it into neat piles, and carts transported it to barns. Wooden forks spread straw for animal bedding. Even small, seemingly insignificant implements like buckets and spades played crucial roles in daily life, ensuring that the farm operated smoothly and efficiently. Maintenance was constant. Iron blades needed sharpening, wooden handles replaced or reinforced, and joints oiled to prevent splitting or rust. Winter months, often quieter in terms of fieldwork, were devoted to repair and preparation. A well-maintained tool could last decades. Neglect could result in failure at critical moments, threatening crops, livestock, and survival. Tools also shaped social structures. Heavy plows, carts, and teams of oxen were often shared among families or villages. Communal labor during harvests and haymaking strengthened bonds, fostering cooperation and interdependence. In this way, tools were not only practical, they were instruments of social cohesion, linking people through shared purpose and work. Regional differences influenced tool design. Wood provided strength and flexibility, while iron added durability. Plows for clay soils were heavier, while those for sandy fields were lighter. Scythes varied depending on the crop, and forks, rakes, and spades were adapted for specific tasks. These adaptations reflect the ingenuity of medieval farmers, who modified tools to fit their environment rather than forcing the land to conform. Tools also carried cultural significance. Plows, scythes, and flails appeared in art and religious symbolism, representing diligence, stewardship, and the cycles of life and death. Even humble hoes and forks embodied endurance, patience, and connection to the earth. Practicality and meaning existed side by side, illustrating the central role of labor and survival in medieval culture. And if you've been enjoying this calm exploration of medieval life, now is a perfect moment to like this video and subscribe. Much like the careful maintenance of tools and the rhythm of daily labor, your support helps preserve these quiet histories for future viewers. It ensures that the stories of forgotten tools and the lives they shaped continue to be shared and remembered. Finally, consider the craftsmanship in these simple implements: handles carved for comfort, blades forged for precision, and forks and rakes shaped for specific soils and crops all demonstrate ingenuity and skill. Even the most humble tool reflects centuries of knowledge, adaptation, and understanding of the land. Through them, we glimpse the heartbeat of medieval life. Tools were silent companions, shaping labor, community, and survival. They enabled families to thrive, bound neighbors together, and ensured continuity across generations. Though often overlooked, they formed the foundation of daily life, connecting people to the land, to each other, and to the steady rhythm of the seasons. The medieval countryside was shaped not by swords or crowns, but by the quiet, persistent work of tools. Plows, hoes, scythes, flails, and even humble buckets and spades formed the backbone of daily life. Each implement carried centuries of knowledge, skill, and care, quietly sustaining families, communities, and the rhythm of the seasons. At the heart of agriculture was the plow. Its iron blade cut through soil, turning it over to prepare fields for sowing. Oxen or horses provided the strength needed, while the farmer guided it carefully, ensuring straight, even furrows. A single misalignment could damage the blade, handle, or soil, impacting the harvest. Yet in practiced hands, the plow became an extension of the body, shaping the land, the labor, and the lives of those who depended on it. The hoe complemented the plow, tending gardens, small plots, and spaces between crops. Its slow, deliberate movement removed weeds, loosened soil, and shaped planting beds. The hoe demanded patience, skill, and care, allowing the farmer to connect intimately with the earth. Unlike the plow, which required power and animals, the hoe provided precision and subtle influence over the success of crops. In summer, the scythe became essential. Its long, curved blade, wielded by skilled hands, cut broad swathes of wheat, rye, or barley. Workers behind gathered stalks into bundles, tying them for transport. Harvesting required coordination, strength, and balance. The rhythm of the scythe shaped not only the fields, but also the passage of time, embedding a steady pulse into the daily life of the village. Once harvested, grain needed processing. The flail separated kernels from husks, turning bundles into usable food. Its repetitive thuds echoed across barns and courtyards, marking the rhythm of survival. Though exhausting, threshing was vital. Bread, ale, and seed for the next season depended on it. The flail symbolized diligence, patience, and the quiet heartbeat of medieval life. Haymaking and livestock care relied on many tools. Pitchforks lifted and turned drying grass, Rakes gathered it into neat piles, and carts transported it to barns. Wooden forks spread straw for bedding, while buckets carried water, milk, or grain. Even small, humble implements contributed to the smooth functioning of the farm, ensuring both human and animal survival. Maintenance was a constant task. Blades were sharpened, handles replaced or reinforced, and joints oiled to prevent splitting or rust. Winter months, quieter in terms of field work, were often spent repairing tools in workshops or barns. A well-maintained implement could last decades, while neglect could lead to failure at critical moments, jeopardizing crops and livelihoods. Tools shaped social life as well. Heavy plows, carts, and oxen were often shared among families or villages. Communal labor during harvest or haymaking strengthened bonds and encouraged cooperation. Tools were not only practical, they were instruments of connection, creating interdependence and reinforcing community ties. Regional differences influenced design and function. Wood provided strength and flexibility, iron added durability. Plows for clay soils were heavier, while sandy fields required lighter designs. Scythes were shaped differently, depending on the crop, and rakes, forks, and spades were adapted to specific tasks. These adaptations highlight the intelligence and ingenuity of medieval farmers, who tailored tools to fit the land rather than forcing the land to conform. Tools also carried cultural significance. Plows, scythes, and flails appeared in art and religious symbolism, representing diligence, stewardship, and the cycles of life. Even humble hoes and forks symbolized patience, endurance, and human connection to nature. Practicality and meaning existed side by side, reinforcing the importance of labor in medieval life. And if you've been following this quiet journey through medieval life, now is a perfect moment to like this video and subscribe. Just as careful maintenance ensured a plow would last, your support helps preserve these stories of forgotten tools and the lives they shaped, ensuring they reach future generations of curious minds. Finally, consider the subtle artistry of medieval tools: handles carved for balance and grip, blades forged for precision, rakes and forks shaped for specific soils and crops. Even the simplest implement reflected skill, experience, and deep understanding of the land. They were small marvels of design, perfectly adapted to the rhythms of daily life. Through these tools, we glimpse the heartbeat of medieval communities, silent companions, teachers, and witnesses to centuries of labor. They enabled survival, connected neighbors, and ensured continuity across generations. Though often overlooked in grand histories, they were the foundation of life itself, linking people to the land, to each other, and to the steady rhythm of the seasons. The rhythm of medieval life was dictated by the seasons, the land, and the tools that shaped both. Plows, hoes, scythes, flails, and even simple buckets and spades formed the backbone of survival. These implements were silent companions, carrying centuries of knowledge and skill, sustaining families, villages, and the quiet pulse of daily life. At the center of agriculture was the plow, its iron blade cut deep into soil, turning it over to prepare fields for sowing. Oxen or horses provided the strength needed to drag it, while the farmer guided each furrow with care. Precision mattered. Uneven lines could compromise the harvest, while damage to the blade or handle could delay work for days. Yet in practiced hands, the plow became an extension of the farmer, shaping the land and the rhythm of labor. The hoe complemented the plow in smaller plots, gardens, and spaces between rows of crops. Its slow, deliberate motion removed weeds, loosened soil, and shaped planting beds. The hoe demanded patience and skill, allowing the farmer to connect intimately with the earth. Unlike the plow, which required power and animals, the hoe provided precision and subtle influence, ensuring crops thrived and families survived. During summer, the scythe was essential. Skilled hands swung its long, curved blade, cutting swathes of wheat, barley, or rye. Workers behind gathered stalks into bundles, tying them into sheaves for storage or transport. Harvesting required coordination, strength, and endurance. The rhythm of the scythe echoed across the fields, marking the passage of time and blending work with a quiet, meditative music that shaped daily life. Once harvested, grain needed processing. The flail separated kernels from husks, turning stalks into usable food. Its repeated thuds created a steady rhythm, echoing through barns and yards. Though physically demanding, threshing was vital. Bread, ale, and seeds for the next planting depended on it. The flail symbolized patience, diligence, and the quiet heartbeat of medieval communities. Haymaking and livestock care relied on various tools. Pitchforks lifted and turned drying grass. Rakes gathered it into neat piles, and carts transported it to barns. Wooden forks spread straw for bedding animals, while buckets carried water, milk, or grain. Even small, humble implements contributed to the smooth functioning of the farm, ensuring survival for both humans and animals alike. Maintenance of tools was constant. Blades were sharpened, handles repaired or reinforced, and joints oiled to prevent splitting or rusting. Winter months, quieter in fieldwork, were devoted to repair and preparation. A well-maintained implement could last decades. Neglect could result in failure at critical moments, threatening the harvest and the livelihood of entire families. Tools also shaped social structures. Heavy plows, carts, and oxen were often shared among families or villages. Communal labor during harvest or haymaking strengthened bonds, fostered cooperation, and built interdependence. Tools, in this way, were not merely practical, they were instruments of community and connection, uniting neighbors in shared purpose and effort. Regional differences influenced the design and use of tools. Wood provided flexibility and strength, while iron offered durability. Plows for clay soils were heavier, while those for sandy fields were lighter. Scythes were adapted depending on the crop, and rakes, forks, and spades were shaped for specific tasks. These adaptations highlight the ingenuity of medieval farmers, who molded tools to fit the land rather than forcing the land to conform. Tools also carried cultural significance. Plows, scythes, and flails appeared in art and religious symbolism, representing diligence, stewardship, and the cycles of life. Even humble hoes and forks symbolized endurance, patience, and the connection between humans and nature. Practicality and meaning coexisted, emphasizing the vital role of labor in medieval thought and life. And if you've been enjoying this slow exploration of medieval life, now is a perfect moment to like this video and subscribe. Just as farmers cared for their tools to ensure survival, your support helps keep these quiet histories alive, allowing future generations to understand the rhythms, labor, and ingenuity of the past. Finally, consider the subtle craftsmanship of these implements, handles carved for comfort, blades forged for precision, and rakes and forks shaped for specific soils and crops, all demonstrate skill and thoughtful design. Even the simplest tool reflected knowledge, experience, and an intimate understanding of the land. Through these tools, we glimpse the heartbeat of medieval life. They were silent companions, teachers, and witnesses to centuries of labor. They enabled survival, fostered community, and ensured continuity across generations. Though often overlooked in grand histories, they were the foundation of life itself, connecting people to the land, to each other, and to the steady rhythm of the seasons. In the quiet fields of medieval Europe, life was measured by the rhythm of labor and the tools that guided it. Plows, hoes, scythes, flails, and simple implements like buckets and spades were more than mere objects. They were companions, shaping the land, communities, and the cycles of survival. At the heart of every farm was the plow, its iron blade cut deep into the soil, turning it over to prepare fields for sowing. Drawn by oxen or horses, it required skill and coordination to guide each furrow accurately. A single misstep could damage the blade, warp the wooden handle, or ruin the carefully prepared field. Yet in the hands of an experienced farmer, the plow became a trusted extension of the body, controlling the rhythm of planting and shaping the very land on which survival depended. The hoe worked alongside the plow in smaller plots, gardens, and between rows of crops. Its slow, deliberate movement removed weeds, loosened soil, and shaped planting beds. The hoe demanded patience and attention to detail, connecting the farmer intimately with the earth. Unlike the plow, which relied on animals and brute force, the hoe allowed for precision and subtle care, ensuring that each seed had the best chance to grow. Summer brought the scythe, its long curved blade slicing through tall stalks of wheat, rye, or barley. Skilled hands swung it in sweeping arcs, while workers behind gathered the stalks and tied them into sheaves for transport. Harvesting required coordination, stamina, and skill. The motion of the scythe created a rhythm that defined the season, blending work with a quiet, meditative flow that permeated daily life. Once harvested, grain needed processing. The flail separated kernels from husks, turning cut stalks into usable food. Its repeated thuds echoed across barns and courtyards, establishing a steady, almost musical rhythm. Though physically exhausting, this work was crucial. Bread, ale, and seeds for the next planting depended on it. The flail symbolized patience, diligence, and the quiet heartbeat of medieval communities. Haymaking and livestock care relied on a variety of tools. Pitchforks lifted and turned drying grass. Rakes gathered it into piles, and carts transported it to barns. Wooden forks spread straw for bedding animals, while buckets carried water, milk, or grain. Even the smallest implements contributed to the farm's efficiency and the survival of its people and animals. Maintenance was constant. Iron blades needed sharpening, wooden handles repaired or replaced, and joints oiled to prevent splitting or rust. Winter months, quieter in the fields, were often spent repairing tools and preparing for the next season. A well-maintained tool could last decades, while neglect could lead to failure at a critical moment, threatening both harvest and livelihood. Tools shaped not only work, but social life. Heavy plows, carts, and oxen were shared among families or villages. Communal labor during harvests and haymaking strengthened bonds, fostered cooperation and built interdependence. Tools were instruments of connection, uniting neighbors in shared purpose and effort. Regional differences influenced design and use. Wood provided flexibility and strength. Iron added durability. Plows differed for clay versus sandy soils. Scythes were adapted depending on the crop, and rakes, forks, and spades were shaped for specific tasks. These adaptations highlight the ingenuity of medieval farmers, who molded tools to fit the land rather than forcing the land to conform. Tools also carried cultural meaning. Plows, scythes, and flails appeared in art and religious symbolism, representing diligence, stewardship, and the cycles of life. Even humble hoes and forks symbolized patience, endurance, and human connection to the earth. Practicality and symbolism existed side by side, demonstrating the centrality of labor in medieval thought and life. And if you've been enjoying this slow journey through medieval farming, now is a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe. Just as tools were cared for and preserved to ensure survival, your support helps keep these quiet histories alive, sharing the forgotten rhythms of labor with future generations. Finally, consider the craftsmanship of these simple tools: handles carved for balance and comfort, blades forged for precision, and forks and rakes shaped for specific soils and crops, all reflect skill, experience, and deep understanding of the land. Even the humblest implement was a marvel of adaptation, perfectly suited to the demands of medieval life. Through them, we glimpse the heartbeat of medieval communities, silent companions, teachers, and witnesses to centuries of labor. Tools enabled survival, fostered connection, and ensured continuity across generations. Though often overlooked, they were the foundation of life itself, linking people to the land, to one another, and to the enduring rhythm of the seasons. The rhythm of medieval life was intimately tied to the tools that shaped it: plows, hoes, scythes, flails, and simple implements like buckets and spades were more than mere objects. They were companions, guiding labor, shaping fields, and sustaining communities through each season. These tools carried centuries of knowledge, skill, and care, quietly ensuring survival. At the center of farming was the plow, its iron blade cut deep into the soil, turning it over to prepare fields for sowing. Drawn by oxen or horses, it required strength and precision. A single misalignment could damage the blade or warp the handle, impacting the harvest. In skilled hands, the plow became an extension of the body, shaping both the land and the rhythm of work. Each furrow marked progress, each line reflected experience, and each season depended on its careful use. The hoe worked alongside the plow in gardens, small plots, and between crop rows. Its slow, deliberate motion removed weeds, loosened soil, and shaped planting beds. Using the hoe required patience and care, connecting the farmer intimately to the earth. Unlike the plow, which relied on animals and brute strength, the hoe allowed for precision and subtle influence, directly impacting the success of crops and the survival of families. Summer demanded the scythe, with its long, curved blade cutting through tall stalks of wheat, barley, or rye. Skilled hands swung it with rhythm and balance, while others gathered stalks into bundles, tying them into sheaves for transport. Harvesting required coordination, strength, and endurance. The motion of the scythe created a gentle music in the fields, blending labor with rhythm and marking the season's passage. Once harvested, grain needed processing. The flail separated kernels from husks, turning stalks into usable food. Its repeated thuds echoed through barns and courtyards, establishing a steady rhythm that marked survival. Though exhausting, threshing was essential. Bread, ale, and seeds for the next planting depended on it. The flail symbolized diligence, patience, and the quiet heartbeat of medieval communities. Haymaking and livestock care relied on a variety of tools. Pitchforks lifted and turned drying grass. Rakes gathered it into neat piles, and carts transported it to barns. Wooden forks spread straw for animal bedding, while buckets carried water, milk, or grain. Every implement, no matter how modest, contributed to the smooth functioning of the farm, ensuring survival for both humans and animals. Maintenance was constant. Iron blades were sharpened, wooden handles repaired or replaced, and joints oiled to prevent splitting or rust. Winter months, quieter in fieldwork, were often spent repairing and preparing tools for the next season. A well-maintained implement could last decades. Neglect could result in failure at a critical moment, threatening crops and livelihoods. Tools also shaped social life. Heavy plows, carts, and oxen were shared among families or villages. Communal labor during harvest or haymaking strengthened bonds and fostered cooperation. In this way, tools were instruments of connection, uniting neighbors in shared purpose and effort. Regional differences influenced design and function. Wood provided flexibility and strength. Iron added durability. Plows for clay soils were heavier. Sandy fields required lighter designs. Scythes were adapted depending on the crop, and rakes, forks, and spades were shaped for specific tasks. These adaptations highlight the ingenuity of medieval farmers, who molded tools to fit the land rather than forcing the land to conform. Tools carried cultural meaning as well. Plows, scythes, and flails appeared in art and religious symbolism, representing diligence, stewardship, and the cycles of life. Even humble hoes and forks symbolized patience, endurance, and the human connection to the earth. Practicality and symbolism coexisted, emphasizing the importance of labor in medieval life. And if you've been enjoying this calm exploration of medieval tools and labor, now is a perfect moment to like this video and subscribe. Just as farmers maintained their implements to ensure survival, your support helps preserve these quiet histories, allowing future generations to learn the rhythms, work, and ingenuity of the past. Finally, consider the craftsmanship hidden in these simple tools. Handles carved for balance and comfort, blades forged for precision, and forks and rakes shaped for specific soils and crops all reflect knowledge, skill, and deep understanding of the land. Even the simplest implement was a marvel of design, perfectly suited to the needs of medieval life. Through them, we glimpse the heartbeat of medieval communities, silent companions, teachers, and witnesses to centuries of labor. Tools enabled survival, fostered connection, and ensured continuity across generations. Though often overlooked in grand histories, they were the foundation of life itself, linking people to the land, to one another, and to the steady rhythm of the seasons. In the quiet rhythm of medieval life, tools were the silent backbone of survival. Plows, hoes, scythes, flails, and even humble buckets and spades shaped the land, guided labor, and connected communities across generations. Each implement carried centuries of knowledge, skill, and care, quietly sustaining families, villages, and the pulse of daily life. At the center of agriculture was the plow. Its iron blade cut deep into the soil, turning it over to prepare fields for sowing. Drawn by oxen or horses, it demanded strength and precision. A single misstep could damage the blade or handle, jeopardizing the harvest. Yet in skilled hands, the plow became an extension of the farmer, shaping the land and controlling the rhythm of labor. Every furrow marked progress, every line reflected experience, and every season depended on its careful use. The hoe worked alongside the plow in gardens, small plots, and between rows of crops. Its slow, deliberate movement removed weeds, loosened soil, and shaped planting beds. Using the hoe required patience, skill, and care, allowing the farmer to connect intimately with the earth. Unlike the plow, which relied on animals and brute strength, the hoe allowed precision and subtle influence, ensuring crops thrived and families survived. Summer brought the scythe, its long curved blade cutting through tall stalks of wheat, barley, or rye. Skilled hands swung it with rhythm and balance, while others gathered stalks into bundles, tying them into sheaves for storage or transport. Harvesting demanded coordination, strength, and endurance. The motion of the scythe created a gentle music in the fields, blending work with rhythm and marking the passage of time. Once harvested, grain needed processing. The flail separated kernels from husks, turning stalks into usable food. Its repeated thuds echoed across barns and courtyards, establishing a steady rhythm that marked survival. Though exhausting, threshing was essential. Bread, ale, and seeds for the next planting depended on it. The flail symbolized diligence, patience, and the quiet heartbeat of medieval life. Haymaking and livestock care relied on a variety of tools. Pitchforks lifted and turned drying grass. Rakes gathered it into neat piles, and carts transported it to barns. Wooden forks spread straw for bedding animals, while buckets carried water, milk, or grain. Every implement, no matter how modest, contributed to the smooth functioning of the farm, ensuring survival for both humans and animals. Maintenance was constant. Iron blades were sharpened, wooden handles repaired or replaced, and joints oiled to prevent splitting or rust. Winter months, quieter in fieldwork, were often spent repairing tools and preparing for the next season. A well-maintained implement could last decades. Neglect could lead to failure at a critical moment, threatening crops, animals, and livelihoods. Tools also shaped social life. Heavy plows, carts, and oxen were shared among families or villages. Communal labor during harvest or haymaking strengthened bonds and fostered cooperation. Tools were not merely practical, they were instruments of connection, uniting neighbors in shared purpose and effort. Regional differences influenced design and use. Wood provided flexibility and strength. Iron added durability. Plows for clay soils were heavier. Sandy fields required lighter designs. Scythes were adapted depending on the crop, and rakes, forks, and spades were shaped for specific tasks. These adaptations highlight the ingenuity of medieval farmers, who molded tools to fit the land rather than forcing the land to conform. Tools also carried cultural meaning. Plows, scythes, and flails appeared in art and religious symbolism, representing diligence, stewardship, and the cycles of life. Even humble hoes and forks symbolized patience, endurance, and human connection to the earth. Practicality and symbolism coexisted, emphasizing the importance of labor in medieval life. And if you've enjoyed this long journey through the quiet world of medieval tools and labor, now is the perfect moment to like this video and subscribe. Your support helps preserve these stories, ensuring that the rhythms, work, and ingenuity of the past continue to reach curious minds everywhere. Finally, consider the subtle artistry of these simple implements. Handles carved for balance and comfort, blades forged for precision, and rakes and forks shaped for specific soils and crops all reflect skill, experience, and deep understanding of the land. Even the most humble tool was a marvel of adaptation, perfectly suited to the demands of medieval life. Through these tools, we glimpse the heartbeat of medieval communities, silent companions, teachers, and witnesses to centuries of labor. They enabled survival, fostered connection, and ensured continuity across generations. Though often overlooked in grand histories, they were the foundation of life itself, linking people to the land, to each other, and to the enduring rhythm of the seasons. As we leave the fields, barns, and gardens of medieval life behind, the story of these tools reminds us that even the quietest implements hold history, ingenuity, and human perseverance. Their legacy continues in every rhythm of labor, every carefully turned furrow, and every seed planted with care.